Welcome back to the State of Choice podcast. I'm your host, Ed Tarnowski, also known as Ed with Ed Choice. Joining me today, the policy and advocacy directors, we have Katherine Munal, Nathan Sanders, and Aaron Gillham. It's nice to see you guys.
Good to see you too,
Great
Ed.
to see you.
Hey there.
So we're just going to jump right in with Aaron. It was a big couple of weeks for Aaron. At the end of February, going into most of March now, he basically was living in Wyoming for a little bit, among other states. So Aaron, why don't we just jump in right with your states? You had a big month.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ed. And great to be back on to give our listeners some updates from the states. And for those that haven't been following, the mountain states have been bustling with activity regarding school choice. Both Wyoming and Idaho enacted significant school choice legislation, expanding educational options for families. And it's been really exciting to be a part of both of those developments. They were really kind of neck and neck in the end as to which one got to the finish line first. Idaho just beating out Wyoming with that gubernatorial signature. Really, really exciting developments there. As those that have probably listened to this podcast before, they may remember that Wyoming did pass school choice legislation last session, a kind of small program limited to just 150% of that federal poverty level, kind of a trimmed down version of what the legislature wanted initially. But this year they came back and they've expanded that program, renaming it the Steamboat Legacy Scholarship. Now, someone from a river city, I was very confused by this name, but I also love little factoids. So I'm going to give listeners a little factoid as to why it's now called the Steamboat Legacy Scholarship. If you are familiar with Wyoming, they are known as the Cowboy State, and on their license plate and on many other kind of government entities, other kind of memorabilia, you'll see this horse and rider. The horse is kind of up on two legs bucking. The name of that horse is Steamboat. So a lot of things in the state get named after that horse, that bucking horse and rider. So that's why it's dubbed the Steamboat Legacy Scholarship. It is not the traditional steamboats that I see on the Ohio River in the summertime. So little factoid there for listeners. But yes, the legislature returned the session determined to expand the previous piece of legislation to universal eligibility. That was their main goal with this session, and they ultimately achieved that. But it was not without its fight, of course. We always appreciate deliberative body, and the House and Senate definitely tackled this thoughtfully. It was a House bill led by Representative Ocean Andrew, House Bill 199. And he really spearheaded and kind of articulated why it was important that all families be eligible for funding. Wyoming, of course, is a very unique state. It's a small state with regards to population. My home county has a larger population than the entire state of Wyoming. So, some of the counter arguments were that there's not a lot of private schools and not a lot of private school choice that currently exists. So why is this so necessary? Of course, on the counter side, you get the arguments that there's a lot of rural districts in Wyoming. So this could be kind of a threat to those schools that serve as more than just high schools and middle schools. They're community centers. They're key parts of Wyoming history and kind of the Wyoming community. So you get both sides of those arguments, which I don't find often kind of are compatible with each other. But nevertheless, that's, some of the discussion that was taking place. And Representative Ocean Andrew and other school choice allies in the legislature just did a great job of explaining that this provides the market forces by which other opportunities can exist and will hopefully come about over time. So kind of into the nuts and bolts of the bill and what ultimately got passed, it was a $30 million appropriation to kickstart this. It did remove that 150% federal poverty level cap. So again, all families now eligible. And then one unique aspect is it does include pre-kindergarten. Pre-K students are eligible. That piece specifically is still capped at 250% of the federal poverty level. So those families that are in that bucket can utilize the pre-K piece. And that was something that the governor had asked for and something the Senate was keen to put back into the bill. And so that piece became a bit of contention towards the final stretch. But ultimately, that's the compromise that the legislature and the executive branch came to. So it will allow $7,000 per ESA student, which is a pretty healthy amount. That's, of course, around or just above even the national average for what we've calculated is the school choice program average at Ed Choice. That's kind of just above that. $6,000, I think, is about where we estimate the average to be. So it's a good, healthy amount that should be transformative to families around the state. And it'll be exciting to see people kind of start utilizing that in the coming years. So that was Wyoming. And as you alluded to, I was out there on the ground quite a bit. So great coalition partners there. Yes, Every Kid and others. I have to give a shout out to the Wyoming Family Alliance, Nathan Winters. He was a lot of fun to work with, and just a really cool capital. It's a small capital. The members, you get to know them, and it's a very intimate kind of setting. So,
And a beautiful state.
at a beautiful state. So only an hour and a half drive from Denver. So, it's situated kind of in the southern part of the state. But spending time in Cheyenne was a real treat for a lot of January and February. But as I mentioned, Idaho actually beat them to the punch. Idaho was working on their own separate school choice piece of legislation, whereas Wyoming's was a more traditional education savings account, ESA. Idaho took a different path with Senator Den Hartog and Representative Wendy Horman kind of spearheading that effort. And they've been working on this for quite some time. Did a lot of homework, consulted with Ed Choice, both our legal team and our policy team, and drafted a refundable tax credit. That's the route they opted to take. And then they tried to keep things relatively simple. In their bill, there is no testing requirements, which is one piece I didn't mention about the Wyoming bill. There is a testing requirement in there, although they do allow for nationally normed tests as a substitute for the state test in Wyoming. So you have some flexibility there, which we always appreciate. But in Idaho, they decided to allow the parents to kind of stand out. As we argue, they are ultimately the accountability that you need. If you have a market situation where parents can truly choose where they send their children, they can make those judgment calls for themselves. If a school is performing well, certainly word of mouth is going to get out and those schools are going to continue to flourish. If schools are not hitting on all cylinders, you might say, that's also going to get around and parents may make other choices. So we think that the testing requirements are often unnecessary, superfluous, because the parents should be that backstop. They're the first educators. They certainly know their children best. And we believe that it's okay to let them choose and to make those choices and to pivot where need be. And that's what school choice ultimately does. So they did not have a testing piece in the Idaho bill. And the way they went about it was again, to kind of keep it as simple and straightforward as possible. As we can see with the tax credit option, one potential advantage is there's no middleman, there's no kind of outsourcing that we would see with a provider. So, or vendor, I should say. So we'll see how this works out. There's not a lot of states that have gone this route, but we think that they've put in some good measures to ensure its success. So it is actually a $50 million appropriation, allowing $5,000 per eligible student. There is an additional $2,500 for special needs students, bumping that amount up to $7,500. So they did take that into account. And there's a little bit of prioritization or kind of accounting for the lower income sector. So for those households, those families that are 300% of the federal poverty level or below, they can actually receive that tax credit in advance. The thinking there was that low-income families would not be able to wait until tax season to file their taxes and then receive that amount. So they could actually fill out the form and apply to receive that money ahead of time to cover their expenses. One piece of accountability they did include was the ability for the tax commission to audit, just as you would any other tax fraud or tax concerns. They can do an audit and make sure that the correct expenses were covered, as there is an approved list with this bill as well. So both Wyoming and Idaho really did well on the uses, as we of course emphasize not just eligibility being universal, but allowing for a variety, a myriad of uses. Both bills achieve that. So it's exciting to see. And I think at least, with the initial appropriations, a lot of families will be able to sign on, and hopefully the demand will continue to increase and the legislature can adjust that appropriation as needed. But two really big developments. Again, Wyoming already had a small program, but for Idaho, this was one of the few holdouts. This was one of the few red states, Republican trifectas, that did not have a single private school choice program anywhere in the state. And so having jumped in with 2 feet and put together such a robust program, it's exciting to see. It's been exciting to be a part of that process. And we'll just kind of see these as they start the implementation process and kind of see what we can do to continue helping them along the way.
Exciting times out west. And before we move on, Aaron, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's happening in North Dakota? You're going to be spending some time up there too. You already have. Let's hear an update.
Yep. So 50 states, 50 laboratories of democracy, and 50 different session calendars. So North Dakota's still going at it. Wyoming has one of the shortest sessions at just 40 days, but North Dakota goes until at most the very early part of May. So they're just over the halfway mark. Crossover has happened, and we do have some school choice bills that are still in the works. There's actually two competing bills, one originating out of the Senate Bill 2400, and one originating out of the House Bill 1540. So both have some pros and cons, and we're just kind of monitoring those as they work their way through the legislature. They're currently both sitting in the opposite education committees. In North Dakota, they do things a little bit different in that they have a time for testimony, their hearings, and then separately they'll get back to those bills at a later date, do some work on them, potentially put forward any amendments, and then take a vote at that time. So we're still waiting on the calendar to reflect that. The hearings took place for both bills last week, which, as you alluded to, I was in the state, was able to provide some testimony for both. And next week will probably be the dates sometime next week, maybe early next week, that we'll see those bills actually get their vote and any potential amendments. Then they have to go to the appropriation committees, and then they'll go to the floor. So again, they're in the opposite chambers now from where they originated. So they're kind of down to the final stretch. It'll be interesting to see if there's any compromise between the two bills. For the House bill sponsor, Representative Ben Koppelman, for his part, he has indicated that he's willing to get behind the Senate bill if the Senate author, and well, now it sits in the House, but if they're willing to make some amendments to kind of incorporate some of his ideas, he's happy to see that be the vehicle going forward. It's unclear if that will actually happen. But yeah, monitoring both those bills. Again, both have some pros and cons, and we're just on the ground as much as possible to try to assist and kind of educate. This will again be another state that does not currently have any private school choice. They're also a state that only convenes their legislature every other year. So if they do not get a bill across the line this year, we'll be waiting till 2027 to see them try again. So that's kind of where things stand. Happy to talk about the bills in a little bit more detail, or some of the specifics of the bill if you've got questions, but it's a bit of a wait and see at the moment.
Thank you, Aaron. A lot has happened out west, and still some to come. And now we're going to turn to Katherine and just give a quick recap on her region. Tennessee did pass a program with universal eligibility statewide earlier this year. It was the first to do so this year. So, Katherine, why don't we start with Tennessee? After passage comes implementation. What is that looking like? And then we can turn to the state where everything is bigger.
Well, in Tennessee, the Department of Education is spearheading implementation, and they're doing a phenomenal job. We've already had our first coalition meeting to discuss plans for moving forward. Our next implementation meeting is April 2nd, and we expect applications to be open in the next 2 months for families to apply in Tennessee and get in line to get an Education Freedom Scholarship account. So it's very exciting in Tennessee. I'm hoping we can have a implementation summit out there to try to encourage more private schools to sign up for the program. But Tennessee is off to the races. Now for Texas, like you said, everything's bigger, which means everything is a bigger fight as well. Again, we have the Senate who has passed a version of school choice and pushed it over to the House. And House has had their House Public Education Committee hearing where they discussed House Bill 3. Now, this hearing went on for 23 hours. I did not stay there that long. I stayed there for about 9. But Chairman Buckley went through the night, and any single person that wanted to testify on for against the bill was welcome to come testify. After that hearing, I think they needed a little time to recover. I haven't pulled an all-nighter since college, so I can't even imagine doing that later in life. Now that they're back to work, we expect some sort of a vote in the House Public Education Committee on Tuesday of this upcoming week. So that would be on, I believe, April 1st. Is that it? Yes, April 1st is when we expect to have the vote in the House Public Education Committee. We have reason to believe the votes are there for House Bill 2 to move out of the committee. Now, there is talk of a committee substitute, which is very common in these types of bills, and we'll just see what happens next week. But I know the governor and the Speaker of the House came out today to say that the bill will be voted out of House Pub Ed on Tuesday of next week. So we expect things to be moving. We still have every reason to believe that we can get this thing done during a regular session rather than either having to go into specials or, like Aaron said, Texas is an every other year. So God forbid we'd have to come back in 2027 to discuss this. Mm-hmm. There's no reason to think we're falling that slow yet. So Texas is on the move.
Right. And I don't want to jinx it, but it's looking increasing like this is finally the year for Texas after so many years of push down there. So this is really, really exciting stuff. And now I'm just going to give an update on New Hampshire. We saw a lot of progress happen in New Hampshire this month. Really, really exciting stuff. The House passed a bill to make the Education Freedom Account program, the state's ESA program, truly universal and a phase-in. In the first year, it would reach 400%, an increase from 350% of the federal poverty line, and then reach true universality in the second year. Now remember, New Hampshire's program is tied to the funding formula, so each kid is guaranteed funding no matter what. There's no concerns about appropriations or any worries about that, at least at this time, as long as the program stays, as long as the funding formula stays the same. And their version is a little bit different. It does get the EFA program to universal eligibility, but it's a little more complicated than the House version. It is to be seen what the final product is going to look like. It is a budget year in New Hampshire, and the most likely scenario is still that both chambers are going to get together during budget season and come to some kind of compromise. That's the most likely scenario that we're going to see. And just to recap too, remember earlier this year, Governor Kelly Ayotte endorsed universal for public school students in her budget address. So it's to be seen what the final product is going to look like in New Hampshire, but we're watching really closely. It's a really exciting state this year and has a strong opportunity to get to true universal choice. Turning to the Southeast now, Nathan, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's happening in your region?
Yeah, and in the South, things are moving a little bit slower. South Carolina, most people have their eyes on South Carolina. So at the very end of February, the House on the floor voted to expand out the ESA bill, sort of this fixed bill that the Senate gave them. The bill originated in the Senate. The House voted to expand it out, get rid of the enrollment caps that were on the bill, to essentially expand it and get rid of the eligibility requirements, even in all 3 years. And so it would be universal in 3 years, meaning every kid is eligible, getting rid of the enrollment caps. A really good bill. Now that bill will go back to the Senate. And the options there are the Senate could concur, or they could not concur and decide to go to something like conference committee and hash it out. Now, it's moving a little bit slower this month, not much progress on what the Senate's going to do. They've been fighting other battles with tort reform and other things that we're not talking about here, but they haven't really made much progress in terms of finding out what the Senate's going to do. Now, I do hear that the Senate most likely will not concur. They're not necessarily on board with a universal bill. So I'm interested to see what sort of the compromise will be. I do think it's going to be a little bit better than what the Senate originally proposed, which is good. That means more students, but I'm not exactly sure what the details are. So more to come there. Probably within the next couple of weeks, we'll see some progress out of South Carolina. The only other notable thing I'll mention is Missouri. They're sort of moving along slowly under the radar with the appropriation that the governor proposed in his State of the State earlier this year. He asked for $50 million for the Mo Scholars program, which for those of you who don't know, it's a tax credit. And so the legislature essentially giving that program $50 million is a huge step in the right direction. That means more kids, more money. The only other thing in the name of implementation in Louisiana for the Gator Scholarship Program, the last I heard for applications on that, this is for late March, it was about 23,000 and some change in terms of applications. We still have until April 15th until applications close. Those are moving right along. Everything's going well there. And hopefully at the end of April, we'll have tons and tons of students who get approved and be able to access the Gator Scholarship programs. And session in Louisiana begins in April, and the legislature will then start to debate the appropriation for that program. So let's hope we can get some money appropriated there.
All right. Thank you for that update, Nathan. That'll be it for this episode of the State of Choice podcast. Thank you for joining for our March update. For more information on EdChoice and our research, please feel free to visit edchoice.org. I'm your host, Ed Tarnowski, also known as Ed with EdChoice. I hope you'll tune in next time.